On behalf of the Seattle Asian American Film Festival, I would like to welcome our filmmakers and some cast and crew from our shorts program. We need to talk about this. So I first want to just welcome everybody and thank you for joining us, and also to our guest today. Thank you so much for sharing your film and joining us for a conversation. Um, and so my name is Mariko. I'm the Special Projects Manager with the Seattle Asian American Film Festival. And first off, I just wanted to start with some introductions from you all. And if you could just kind of introduce yourself, your name of your film, and a little bit about what inspired you to create it. Shuchi, do you want to go first?
Sure. Hi, my name is Shuchi Talati, and I'm the writer and director of a period piece. And I think what inspired me was a couple things. I mean, one is like, I'm really interested in many films. I feel like when sex is depicted, it's almost like it's like a punctuation. You know, people fall in love, they have sex, and then the story continues. And that's not my experience of sex. I think that's not most people's experience of sex. It's almost like a conversation and things evolve. So I wanted to explore sexuality in that way. And I feel like, and then it was really important for me to have a South Asian cast because I feel like we don't often get to see ourselves in this role where like the characters are South Asian, but we don't allude to their South Asianness. Like that's not the most important part of the story. It's like, it's really about like disillusionment and love and longing. So yeah.
And when I was in the process of thinking about a script and what I wanted to write about, I knew from the beginning that it would mean a lot to me to write a story about immigration and cultural belonging, because those are themes that, you know, drew me to filmmaking in the first place and were things that I had been wrestling with since I moved to the US for college. So I grew up kind of in between in the US and China, and I knew that I wanted to make a film about some aspect of that, some aspect of my childhood. And I think, you know, my film is about this Chinese grandmother, and I think that's a character that we don't often see, like an age group that we don't often see represented on screen, and an experience that, you know, can sometimes be sidelined and not tapped into. And so Fishbowl is not entirely based on a true story, but is based on kind of my imagination of my grandparents' experience when they first moved to the US to take care of me when I was born. So obviously don't remember anything about that experience, but I started thinking about that and thinking about how, you know, after a month of being in the US, they felt so lonely, felt so disconnected in like this environment where they didn't speak the language, they didn't know anyone, they couldn't drive or go anywhere, and basically just, you know, had no agency. And so I just kind of took what I guess they must have felt and thought really deeply about what that could look like in this character on a screen.
My name's Clarisse. I directed and created the Kitchlets, and I was researching on brownies, the mythology of brownies, when I kind of went into a deep dive of this mythology of these little creatures that kind of come out at night to clean the house. And it made me realize that over many different cultures, from Chinese, Korean, the Greek goddesses and all of that, there's always an entity, a house deity that takes care of the home. And I wanted to bring this magic back to Singapore, where I came from, and kind of create a little tale based off the mythology of little spirits that come out at night. Yeah.
Hi, everyone. I'm Julia Liu. I directed Driving While Black Magic. And the film is based off a play written by Vadik Kulumba, a Providence, Rhode Island playwright and artist who, you know, it's funny, we met by chance at an art show, and we had mutual friends because Providence, Rhode Island is small. And we found out we both like to make, you know, weird, beautiful art with like an anti-racist lens. And he had this play that he had written, and I was looking for content to make into a short. And so I read his play, and it just, the first scene really spoke to me and jumped out as like so cinematic and interesting. And the whole play itself is like this huge universe of Providence Plantations, which is actually the official name of Rhode Island. It's Rhode Island and the state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. It's like on the seal and on, yeah, it's this legacy of slavery. And just in November 2020 was when we voted to take the plantations off the title, and it got finally changed in 2020. So it took that long. But yeah, so we teamed up to collaborate and adapt the first scene of his play into the short, which became Driving While Black Magic. And it was kind of too late notice, and he couldn't make it tonight, but he wishes everyone well, and he's really excited to be a part of that. Our film is a part of this festival. So thank you so much for having us.
I'm Chris Slow. I'm the director of Black Ghost Sun. And the short was based largely on my cousin's life as a single father, Chinese-American single father raising a Black son.
Hi, my name is Ramon Dompor. I'm a video journalist at the Seattle Times, and I made the film Burden to Carry. Burden to Carry is about the family members of John T. Williams, who back in 2010 was killed by Seattle police officer Ian Burke for essentially wood carving out on the street. You can see in the film there's some police footage where Officer Burke yells at John T. to put down his carving knife, and John T. was just hard of hearing and didn't really understand what he was saying, and he died because of that. And we wanted to tell this story not just because it was the 10-year anniversary this past year, but because essentially like all this police violence came to a head with deaths, deaths of citizens happening all across the country. And we wanted to show that this is something that's been happening for a very long time. And even though it was something that happened 10 years ago, obviously it's something that John T.'s family members have had to deal with ever since that shooting happened. And we wanted to tell their story. So that's essentially a Burden to Carry.
Hi everyone, my name's Jamie. I was the writer, director, actor in Resilience, and I originally created this film actually for the HBO APA Visionaries contest back in 2019. And so their theme was breaking barriers. And I think when I was reflecting on what that meant to me as like an Asian American, I automatically kind of thought about my mom. So in the film, it explores cultural and language barriers, because I feel like oftentimes as like first generation, especially like older women, when they come to the US, like my mom doesn't really speak English and my Cantonese isn't that good. And so growing up, I just felt like there was a lot of miscommunication. There was a lot of things that weren't said, a lot of things that were said but meant different things. And so I just wanted to have the whole film kind of explore like the difficulties that come up with not being able to speak the language and not being able to be in the same culture. And then it's actually based off of my mom's story and kind of like her sexual assault at work. And I wanted to explore that and kind of let people really understand like what goes on inside like, so many women's minds, especially when like they can't even express it themselves. And so that's kind of where the story came from.
Thank you. Yeah, and this collection of shorts, all of the films confront so many topics that are often not openly discussed in the Asian American community. And so I kind of wanted to know more about, as you've been sharing your films with people, what are some of the conversations that the films have been a catalyst for?
I think just like for my film, I had a little screening of it for my friends, and they were predominantly Asian American. And I just remember like one of my friends came up to me and said, it's like she couldn't put into words what she was feeling, but she was feeling something. And I think like that sparked the conversation of like, why aren't we able to, even like name what we're feeling. And just, I think that really like helped us really understand, like even in Asian culture, like you just don't say things very explicitly. And so I think that like sparked a conversation of like, okay, like how do we communicate in a way in Asian culture that other people can understand us, and like how can we understand ourselves better as well?
Yeah, I feel like for my film, I think there's been a lot of, I think there's a, I mean, I think the most precious like feedback to me was from like younger Indian filmmakers, women, or like just young like South Asian women like writing to me and saying like, I just like, it was so exciting to see like a South Asian woman on screen like that. And I think that was like the most meaningful, because I just like, I did want the film to spark conversation, and I also made it with a great degree of trepidation. Like I was very scared to share it with my parents who are back in India. And I did, and it was like, it was actually kind of wonderful, you know. They were kind of silent for 2 days, and I was like, oh my God. And then they both like wrote me really sweet notes, you know, that they kind of related, and they related to both characters. So I feel like that has been really special for me.
I don't know that Burden to Carry really was the catalyst for anything, but it definitely, I think it showed that there was this movement across the country, and definitely here in Seattle, regarding you know, justice when it came to death by police officers. You know, just in the past year, our team at the Seattle Times has had to do so many stories about police violence, and this one about John T. Williams, you know, it really shows that there's lasting pain that happens within families, like years and years after the death of a loved one. So I think that if nothing else, like it at least got a lot of people together. And you know, when the death anniversary of John T came up, there were a lot of people out in the streets. Obviously, there were a lot of people out in the streets for most of the summer, but we saw a lot of people who knew about John T. Williams, who knew about this injustice that happened, and they kind of rallied around the family. And I think it's important to know that there are people who are surviving, you know, people that die at the hands of police officers, and there is still lasting pain that they have to live with.
For the Kitchlets, it was interesting to see when I was showing people the film from the beginning stages to the end, how different people were perceiving the main character, Mina, and how when I approached the film and created her disposition, I came to it with a certain angle, but when I showed it to different people, everyone had a different perspective, a slightly different perspective, like, oh, they think she's going through depression. Someone else thinks she's going through anxiety. Someone thinks it's just a sad day or a sad few days. And I really loved how people were kind of, in a way, seeing themselves in her. And I feel like, yeah, I'm really glad this film was able to get that into people's heads and reflect on that.
I think for Fishbowl, a lot of people around me who got to see the film said like that experience of, you know, having grandparents coming from their home countries to stay with them in the States was something that they had when they were kids, or their grandparents were still living with them now. And something that meant a lot to me were that a lot of my friends or people who watched the film said that, you know, when that was happening, when their grandparents were living with them, they had just never stopped to think about what their experience was during that time. And people have said, you know, oh, when I think back, you know, I wish that I had, you know, taken a second to think about that, or I wish that I had realized the loneliness that they might have experienced, or like this was exactly, like this film was exactly what was happening in my family. I just didn't really think about it or contextualize it in that way at the time. And I think for a lot of people, like it happens when you're so young. And I think you don't really think of your grandparents that way, it kind of is sidelined in your life. And so I think, yeah, it's been really great to, you know, have people say like, oh, it really made me think about that, or it made me want to call my grandparents and talk about that time.
I just want to add that it made me think of my grandma, and I hadn't thought about her perspective and what her experience would be and how isolating it would be to be. And even the street that you filmed on when she walks outside or whatever, I was like, oh, that looks like my street growing up. And it really like hit like amazing. It was like very poignant.
Am I the last person? I don't know
Yeah,
who else is left. Oh, okay. You know, in regards to Black Ghost Sun, I think there's, you know, a very present anti-Blackness that permeates. I mean, I'm speaking from my own personal experience, Chinese American, but I think it extends to Asian American families and culture in general. And it, you know, it was a surprise to me when I found out that my cousin had a son, first of all, but a son that happened to be Black. And I only found this out when I was sorting through some family photos, and I saw this one Black kid amongst a sea of all Chinese, and I was sort of asked my father, like, who is this kid? And he explained sort of like what had happened with my cousin, and it just made me sort of consider and think about what's going on in his family and what has this been like for them, because I, you know, understanding my own family and sort of like the prejudices that they've carried and how those have been broken down or transformed over through their experiences. I know it's something that I think is not really addressed, and I think there's a really subtle sort of the kinds of racism, particularly in a place like New York, where the movie takes place. You know, I think we often view racism through the lens of, you know, Caucasian or white people in relation to ethnic minorities, but there is these sort of subcultures that have all different types of racism interactions with each other that I think are fascinating and difficult and challenging, and we never see this sort of stuff play out, particularly in film. And I think that's part of the reason why I want to address that in the film. And I think it sparks good conversation, especially I really sort of that the relationship between Black Americans and the Asian community, or Asian American community. It's, I don't know. I found it so significant in my own childhood, and it's not something that people ever really discuss openly, at least.
What you just said made me think of, is it okay if I just
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Like during the uprising, the Black Lives Matter uprisings this summer, and then like watching also my family's reaction to that, or extended family, not my, well, yeah, my extended family or my family abroad, whatever, the reaction to not everybody's, but some of them being like, oh, but law and order and it shouldn't be destructive or whatever, but then also at the same time supporting the protesters in Hong Kong. It just like, that is just like hypocritical, you know, and like, and having conversations where you're just like, well, do you see, I mean, the Hong Kong protesters are extremely destructive and doing a lot of civil disobedience, and, you know, and it's like violent protests, right? And that you think is a worthy cause. So like, can you understand why Black Americans and just like Americans in general who are trying to like push towards anti-racism and against white supremacy, like, are, you know, in the streets or whatever? And so I feel like that, like Chris, what you were saying really, yeah, it's important to talk about, is like the anti-Blackness and the racism within our own communities, and it's hard to talk about.
Oh yeah. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I really enjoyed your movie, Chris. It was amazingly done.
Thank you.
Like I just,
Thank you.
because I speak Cantonese too, and so when I was hearing it, I was like, it's crazy because I feel like those are the things that my mom has said to me, like, especially when the mom was like, you know, we bought you that thing, right? But then it's like, but then there's a Black, you know, child who is there instead of like an Asian child. And you're like, oh my gosh, I don't know, it was so different for me, but I just felt I could feel what he was feeling, even though our same, like we didn't have like the same skin color, and it was great.
It was interesting because that scene itself, you know, that sort of, a lot of it was improvised, and the actress, she just pulled that out, and after that one take, everybody was sort of like, oh my God, I went through this before. We all felt it.
Yeah.
So it was very real. It was just drawn from experience. So it was,
Yeah. And also, while we're talking about your film, I just really loved how kind of beautifully and deftly you went between the child's point of view to, like, at moments, like the father's point of view, and just like seeing like their experience. I just thought it was so, like, I think it's kind of a hard thing to do in a short film, to switch perspective in a way that feels really like just so fluid and like earned. And I really loved how you did it very like quietly without many words, you know.
Yeah, thank you. That's very kind of you to say.
Yeah, do any of you all have questions that you, or kind of thoughts about each other's films that you want to ask or express?
This isn't really a question, but it's more of like a general observation. But it's like, so this is my first like film festival, and to be in like an Asian American film festival, I was like, where have I been my whole life? Like, why haven't I seen more of like these types of films? Because as I was just watching all of them, I just connected so well, and I just could feel so much for the characters. And it just like made me realize like these stories just need to be told. Like, I don't know. I think that was just something that I really truly felt from it, and I wanted to express that.
That's a great plug for SAAFF, another film.
Really, it's a great festival, guys.
Yeah, and I had to say, like, the lineup felt like very much of the zeitgeist. Like, I feel like there were like maybe like 4 films like dealing with like state violence, like states, you know, there were like 3 maybe touching on police brutality, and then there's the Thank You, Come Again, you know. And so it felt like very much in conversation with what's happening, but also like a lot of the stories felt like extremely like, I mean, they all also felt very universal, like and it would be extremely relevant like 10 years from now. So I really, really enjoyed like this lineup. I would love to hear about people's like casting process. I feel like there are some really wonderful performances, and age ranges, like casting kids, casting like older people, those are all like hard things to cast. And if anyone has any stories, I would love to hear them.
I don't really have any, it's not much of a story, but I think we just got lucky with the 2 leads. The kid, Kayvon, was one of the first people. I had just put something on Actors Access or something, and he's one of the first submissions. Hadn't done much work, but he had the right eyes and he took direction really well. And then on set, he was just really charming and funny and just open to everything. And the person who played the father, Gary Luck, was actually a friend of the producers, the film's producer, and not an actor by trade, but he had the right look, and he had done acting before. But outside of that, I had quite a difficult time finding, without a casting director, without hiring a casting director, finding actors. I mean, there were just a handful of submissions really for that role. Whereas, when I was trying to cast some racist cops, I got endless submissions for that, and it just drove me nuts in a way. But it's just to be expected.
Yeah.
Yeah, similarly with Fishbowl, we were extremely lucky to find the grandma, but we were extremely unlucky for a really long time. We we were shooting in Middletown, Connecticut, which already limited so many of our options. But we were casting a lot in New York, and I think we had maybe exhausted just emailing and reaching out to every old Asian like grandmother actor or someone who could play that in New York. Um, and then, I was talking to my parents and I was telling them, it was maybe a week and a half before we were supposed to shoot. It was so, so close to the deadline. Saying like, do I need to rewrite the script? But, the story is so important to me. And it's been such a long process. And they actually suggested that I use one of our really close family friends who lived in Boston. And so I reached out to them. They basically did it as a favor to me. She had never acted before in her life. Like she was not an actor, but she had been living the exact life that was written about in the script for 10 years. She was a professor in China and she moved to the States to be with her family. And by the time we were shooting, had been, really used to her life in the States and just loved it here. But she remembered exactly what that experience was like coming to the US. And the song that she sings to the fish in the Fishbowl was a song that she made up and she used to sing to her grandkids when she would take care of them when she was first in the US. So it felt really great to work with her and have that connection with her.
Wow. I love what you're saying about like you were very unlucky for a long time. I so relate. I mean, casting on our film was so hard. Like I have never had, like when you're casting like parts in their like 20s, 30s, like when you post, you usually get flooded with submissions. And this is like, I think because of the nudity and the content, I mean, it was like so many people initially were like, yes, interested, and then would like totally ghost on me. I mean, I was just like, was ghosted by so many actors that at some point we're like, okay, I feel like we've exhausted Brooklyn. We've exhausted New York, which is crazy to say. And then we started like, I mean, our lead Sonal is from Chicago and our female lead, and our male lead is from LA, and it was like a tiny budget. And then finally I'm like, oh my God, we're gonna have to fly these people to, New York. I'm like begging for like airplane miles. But I credit like my producer who also works as Ezra, who also works as a casting director. And she had this like, she was like, your film has potential for comedy. And we have one of the actors has to be a comic, because I feel like comics can do drama, but dramatic actors don't always have comic timing. And so Sonal actually is like a stand-up comedian also, in addition to, she's acted a little bit, but I think she's a real natural performer, but stand-up comedy is like her trade. And it was like, it felt like a risk, but I really trust this is like Ezra's instinct. She was like, Shuchi, I feel like she has it,
Yeah, I think for my film, honestly, Kathy, the woman who played the lead, she was the only person I think that fit the role who could speak like Mandarin and English. And I posted it on like casting websites and there were no hits. Like I kid you, no other hits. And I just knew of her because of a friend that I knew from theater. And so I was just lucky. Like I think we confirmed with her 2 days before the shooting. And then same thing with the other actor, Dave. He I think was one of 3 submissions, and he was just a natural. And yeah, honestly, it's like crazy because I feel like there's a lot of Asians up here, but not a lot of like Asian actresses who can speak English or English and Chinese who are like 50. It's very specific.
Yeah, I had a similar issue at first when casting Mina because she's supposed to be about middle-aged, and I don't know, it was my 4th-year film at Cal Arts and I wanted to have more fun with it. Definitely in my previous film, I put all the posters up and had to audition people, and kind of for my 4th-year film, I wanted to like find people I knew. So I went to like friends who are younger and had them go into the booth and do their thing, and it wasn't working. You know, she was sounding too young. And then finally, I kind of into my head came across one of my previous professors at Cal Arts. Her name's So-Young Kim. She now works elsewhere, but yeah, I showed her the film, and she was kind of like Annie. She was like, "This is me. This is my life." Like all the way to the frozen dumplings, and yeah, it really worked out with her. She was, yeah. Even though Mina didn't say much, the stuff that she did say, I just wanted this kind of, I guess, timid feel to it. And yeah, Soyeon definitely, she brought herself, her own emotions into it too. I got lucky in the end.
Yeah, I feel like when she speaks at the end and she's like, hi, and you like hear her, you know, it's just like, yeah, it really gets you.
Yeah, thanks. Yeah, Soyeon did such a great job. It's crazy. It was, yeah, I think I had so much time in the booth till that point that I didn't have any more budget to go back into the booth. So we actually did it in a car with all like the windows closed, and it came out fine, thank gosh. But yeah.
My friend said the audio was really good, like really crisp. So yeah, props to you for making that happen.
Yeah, hack for the next film if you don't have too much budget.
It's like all my budgets, all my films.
For Driving While Black Magic, I was lucky enough to know Clotilde Horn, who did an incredible job as the lead, Nadej, because I had tried to make a film earlier, like a year before, that didn't end up happening, and I just put an ad on Craigslist, honestly, and she was doing her MFA at Brown, and she answered it, so I knew her from the previous audition. And so when I had this story or this film, I was like, well, she's amazing, and I definitely want to work with her. And Vadik, the writer, he also had known her, so we both were like, yes, Clotilde. And then Becky, who did the voiceover of Obey, who is the spirit mother in the car, who also is like, so I'm so in awe of her. She's such a talented person. She played Obey in the play version and in his theatrical version. So he hooked me up with her, and we like got together and did that recording. And then he played Reggie, Vadik played Reggie, and then like I had another friend who played the reporter, because I tried to do that voiceover of the reporter, and it just, everyone was like, and I changed the pitch in my voice, and everyone was like, that's bad, like cut this. So I was like, okay, I have to find an actual professional person. And so my friend does radio, so that Anna, she's great. So yeah, I feel really grateful to have the cast that I was able to work with.
Great. Thank you. And Ramon, I know that yours is a documentary, so you weren't casting anybody, but I really appreciated the settings you chose for the interviews and talking to John's family members. And I guess, can you speak to that a little bit?
Yeah, obviously, you know, we don't do any casting, but originally the plan for this story was to just talk to John T's brother, Rick Williams, and all I had to go on was a bit of information that he did wood carving underneath the Space Needle. So I don't know, I forgot what it was called, but so he would go to the Seattle Space Needle every day, and he would do wood carving underneath there. And I had his phone number. I texted him. I said, hey, do you mind if we come by and film you and do an interview with you about John T? He said, yeah, sure. Well, he'll be here. You know, he's there every day. So we went. We did the interview right there, right where he was wood carving. And I know you can tell in the audio that you know, you hear cars and trucks driving by, so it's a little bit messy, but we made it work. And at the end of the interview, he kind of just mentions off his cuff, said, oh, my son, Eagle Son, also carves. He's actually carving in Pike Place right now. And I said, oh, is there a chance that we could talk to him as well? And he's like, yeah. And then he just calls him up on his phone in a FaceTime call and puts me on. I was like, oh, I guess I'm gonna talk to you now. And we're in 30 minutes, I just sprinted over to Pike Place, and we did that whole scene with Eagle's son carving there. Actually, it was weird because I say that I sprinted there in 30 minutes, but I went over, and then by the time I got to Pike Place, Rick Williams was already there carving next to his son. I don't know how he beat me there. But yeah, I wasn't expecting to get that scene, but we ended up doing Eagle's son's interview there in Pike Place also. And for those of you familiar with Seattle, you know it's not a quiet place either, but we were able to make that work. But I was really, really grateful that they were both willing to share their story with me, especially Eagle's son. You know, he opens up the short video with the fact that a lot of people say that he looks like his uncle John T, and it's a painful thing that he has to hear all the time. And I think that it really helped to tell the story of what they're going through and this lasting pain that they've had for the past 10 years.
Yeah, well, thank you all so much for coming up at the end of our time together this evening. But I just want to thank you all for making stories and sharing stories with us as well. And so also to our audience, we want to thank you so much for joining the 9th Seattle Asian American Film Festival. And we greatly appreciate your support for the festival and our filmmakers and our community. And a quick plug, if you haven't done so already, take a moment and fill out our festival participant survey. There's a link in your confirmation email and on the website. Data from the surveys really help us out. They help us get grants and sponsorships that make the festival possible. And it's just another way that you can support SAAFF. Also, be sure to check out other programs at seattleaaff.org. We still have tickets available. And so on the behalf of the Seattle Asian American Film Festival, I want to thank you all and stay safe and stay healthy.